Welcome back to Rink Rap, presented by Forever Blueshirts. I am Jim Cerny. This good-looking guy right here, he is Don Greca from ESPN Radio, also part of the New York Rangers broadcast team as well. Donnie, thanks for a few minutes today, man.
How are you, buddy? Everything good?
Everything is good, and we got you wired in here right before the Stanley Cup Final, and of course, before you head on the air with, Don, Hahn, and Rosenberg. And you and I are probably only a handful of people that get the Don Hahn reference.
That's right. An old Met from way back.
The real Don Hahn from 1973, which just ages us even more than we're aging in front of everybody's eyes as it is. But yeah, so Don Hahn and Rosenberg, how do you like the new gig? It's got to be a little bit of a transformation a little bit, right? After so many years with Michael.
Yeah, 22 years with Michael, and then the last 9 with Peter involved. Yeah. And now you've got Alan, who I've known for years. I mean, when we first started the radio station, the Islanders were on our air. And so I did shows over at Champions across the parking lot from the Coliseum, and Alan would always come over because he covered the team for Newsday for so many years. And he's been working for us now going back a decade. So I've known him for 20 years and of course, working with Peter the last 9 with the K show, but a 3-man show, the chemistry of that, something new. And then we had, unfortunately, Alan lost his sister early on. And then on the good side, Peter had a baby. So there was, Alan missed some time, Peter missed some time. So we kind of got off to a little bit of a slow start from that standpoint, both good and bad. But now we've been able to hit the ground running. We had, obviously the Knicks being a major story for us, and with Alan covering the team, that's really helped. So it's been fun.
So it's funny, and you never know when you're having conversations, especially with somebody I've known 30 odd years like you, just the tangents that you jump off on here. So you mentioned Champions, which of course is Marriott next door to the Nassau Coliseum. Back in the 1993 Islanders playoff run, I was covering the team, covering it for Sports Phone, that entire run. And after pretty much every home game, Pete Stemkowski, who is then the former Ranger, would do a talk show for an hour after every Islander home playoff game for WGBB over at Champions. And he'd always want me on, do what you got to do in the locker room, do what you got to, but come over, give us the feel of the locker room, what's going on with the Islanders, and whether it be, the Penguins or the Capitals or the Canadiens, the 3 teams they played, whatever. So it was great. It was a great opportunity for me, and, get some free grub as well, hang out with Stemmer, who, is an absolute gem. So there's one day Stemmer goes, we go to commercial break. He goes, all right, we've got 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever in the commercial break. I'll be back. So all of a sudden in my ear, I started hearing, okay, 15 seconds. Stemmer's nowhere to be found. Okay, 10, 9, 8. I'm the guest. Stemmer could be anywhere in Nassau or Suffolk County at this point, right? So I come back. I literally do like 2 entire segments by myself because Stemmer is off having refreshments with the fans instead. And he comes back and goes, hey, thanks for holding down the fort. Yeah, so there you go. Stemmer, Champions. This is what you do to me, Don. Talking to you, you dredge up these stories from the past. So,
listen, we could do a whole podcast on Stemmer. I mean, some of the stuff is, if you're willing to work blue, I can tell you some many stories, but and a lot of that stuff ended up on the air, even some of the stuff that he told, the stories that he told. Like whenever they played the Winnipeg Jets,
he'd always yes, he did.
Yeah. He said that he's the one that put the peg in Winnie.
So. That is Stemmer, indeed. Oh, boy. Hey, Rangers could use the...
He's great, man. I mean, he was on that 67 Cup team with the Leafs, the last Leaf team to win a Stanley Cup, and he's got so many stories, and he knows his hockey too. So I love the guy.
Yeah. So, from a broadcast point of view, before we talk about, the Rangers, Stemmer makes me think of broadcasts. Obviously, you've worked with him on broadcasts before with the Rangers. Just kind of your thoughts being around the, I know it wasn't day to day, but you got to see enough of it up close, kind of the Sam Rosen farewell tour. And not only the love that he received at the Garden, But what I really, really took heart in was seeing just how respected and just out and out loved he was throughout the entire league. Every city that he went to,
Yeah.
teams, players, broadcasters, management, fans, just saluting him. And I mean, right here, it hit me right there because you and I both know what a great dude Sam is.
He's terrific. And, you know, the way the charter is getting to travel with the Rangers, I get to sit next to him.
Yeah.
And the stories that he'd have. And he was able to balance the line of truly loving the Rangers, growing up a fan of the Rangers, that being his dream job, and caring so much about the team without really being a homer. Honestly, I think he let Joe Micheletti analyze the game, and he was able to give the enthusiasm that was necessary. So I think that's why all the out of town, even Devils and Islander fans, appreciated him, because he wasn't an unabashed homer, at least to me. You know, he had this shtick with the power play goal and all that, but he wasn't like an over the top homer, because he went through as much bad as good, probably more bad than good. And yet he never lost his enthusiasm, never lost his love. And you could see, you've been around people, Jim, that have been around for a long time, and they're jaded. You know, they've been there, they've done that. It's just a job to them. It never was for Sam. He loved it. He adored every second of being around the team. Even the last year when, you know, you started to wind down, I really felt bad when it was becoming clear the Rangers were not going to go to the playoffs, and this was going to end in that regular season game against Tampa. Him still talking to the coaches before the game, after games, which a lot of people probably don't know, is I would do, when I did the post game, I do a half-hour post game, and we'd leave together, because that half hour I was doing the post game, he's listening to the network post game, writing down the quotes, whatever he can use for the next game, information. He was always at practice. Like, he didn't have to do that. He's Sam Rosen, right? But he still put in the work to the very last second, even when they were mathematically eliminated and the games didn't have any meaning in the standings. He still brought every game like it was game 7. And for him to be able to do that just makes me just what an absolute professional he was. And I'm so glad he got his moment against Vancouver. And they had a little get together afterwards, and getting to see so many people, players. You know how the connection between players and announcers now are so divided, and yet players still loving him and talking to him. He was really special dude, man. Really special.
Yeah, absolutely. Loved what Matt Zuccarello did too when Minnesota came in for their final trip. You know, I mean, how cool was that, right? So love that. That's probably the high point of the Rangers season as we've looked back on it. And listen, like I said to you before we even started recording here, listen, I've beaten down the entire past of this season, right? We've analyzed it, we've overanalyzed it, we've blamed, we've made excuses, we've reasons. Okay, this team's got to move forward. And of course, they did. Peter Laviolette fired. Mike Sullivan is the new head coach. But what's next? What do you think Chris Drury has to do to really move this thing forward? Is there a big trade out there to be made? We know he's not afraid, right? We know he's not afraid to, step on toes or maybe do what's not popular in that locker room if he feels it's right. And I know his big move was JT Miller, January 31st. But what do you think the next domino is to fall? Or is it just going to be more tinkering, and he's going to rely on Mike Sullivan, the new head coach, to bring out the best in this group and, the pride in this group as well, to kind of come back as a more collective, solid group than they were a year ago?
It's such a difficult conundrum because, there's talent there. I mean, they did go to game 6 of the conference final a year ago, but we did see what fool's gold that was, because they were just so heavy reliant on the power play. The power play bailed them out of so many games and so many series. If the microcosm of the Rangers season last year was that win at MetLife against the Islanders. Played poorly, but all of a sudden they get some power play opportunities. They come back, they win the game. And it really masked what was a poor showing, but because the power play bailed them out in the third period, they won the game. And all the talk was, boy, they really just know how to win, when really it was just the power play bailing them out. Fox wasn't 100%. The power play disappeared last year, and all of a sudden they became an ordinary non-playoff team when a lot of the components were the same. They got a little bit of a spurt when JT Miller came, but that kind of faded quickly. To answer your question, I keep going back to what Dave Maloney said multiple times during games during the year. The Rangers will be better off once this becomes JT Miller's team. And I think that's where they have to, whatever they do, it has to accentuate and be something that works around JT Miller. There was a little magic with Zibanejad, but again, it was fleeting. What's going to accentuate JT Miller? You can't move Mika Zibanejad. He doesn't want to move. I don't know what you do about that. I think moving away from Mika Zibanejad would be a good thing. No offense to him, but I think this time has passed, but you're probably stuck. Chris Kreider at this point, are you going to get value if you move him? Considering his age and the kind of year that he had, the back's barking now. There's been issues with him physically. But I think just getting away from the Kreider-Zibanejad Rangers and making it the JT Miller Rangers is probably the best thing. How do you go about that? That's what Chris Drury has to decide. What do you do with Keandre Miller? I think he's an attractive piece. He's a restricted free agent. Could he be somebody to make Kreider more attractive if you were to package both of them together? Finding a way where guys can slot into the right positions. Where Vincent Trocheck, I love the guy, and I think he could be a future captain of the team. But is he a top 6? Is he a top 2 center? So slotting all these things. What I keep coming back to, Jim, and it's a major splash, but I think it's something that actually needs to happen, is do they address the possibility of trading Artemi Panarin? He's got a year left on his contract. He's very attractive, I think, to some teams. If Mike Sullivan and Chris Drury want a north-south team, he's not a north-south guy. So as much as you'd hate to give a guy that's your leading scorer, is that the move that can now make it more JT Miller's team, get a lot in return? Is that, because that to me is the biggest splash they can make. All the other moves are going to be tinkering, as you said. Are they willing to make that kind of a splash? And can Artemi Panarin get back the package that you need to really reform this team?
So, lot to unpack there, especially with Panarin, especially with that news that came out at the end of the season. Something that certainly it didn't catch the Rangers off guard, because they had the settlements, with the alleged sexual assault that was levied against Panarin. Mm-hmm. So that's still out there. You can argue, well, should that be a factor? It's a factor. Maybe not as a big a factor as the fact that he has a complete no move clause. So you've got to get his buy-in on, it's going to be better. You need to move on. Now, Drury, again, not afraid to put the screws to a player, do whatever it takes to make them uncomfortable, to get them out of town, to get Jacob Trouba to accept a trade to Anaheim. He's been able to put the squeeze on before. But Panarin's a borderline superstar player. He's certainly a star player. Does that make it more difficult? I mean, this is really walking a tightrope if you're Chris Drury, if you're talking about moving Artemi Panarin and getting him to sign off on it, or to basically force him to agree to some kind of move.
Right. I remember it was actually the day, I guess that was 2007, that Joe Torre moved Alex Rodriguez batting 8th in the playoff game against the Tigers. Remember that?
Yeah.
And I was at the Rangers were playing the Flyers. And I was I was talking to Larry, and of course Larry Brooks is a big baseball guy. As you know, he covers the Yankees sometimes after the Rangers season is over. And he said, movement clauses are so bogus. He's like, why would a guy want to stay with an organization when the organization tells him we don't want you? No movement clauses, no trade clauses. You can get around that. Now, obviously, Mika is a special case because Mika just doesn't want to do it. But if you were to tell Artemi, listen, you got a year left on your contract. We have no interest in re-signing you when that's over. Do you want to bust chops and stay here just for the 1 year, or do you want to have a conversation about possibly moving you someplace for that year that would make us better in a situation, maybe put you in a better place as well? I think the Rangers can be a playoff team next year. They've got some really nice pieces, and
for sure,
I don't know what's going on in the Metropolitan Division. Are the Devils going to be healthy? Is Washington going to repeat what they did last year? Philadelphia is a mess. Columbus could take a step back, but maybe he can go someplace where he's got a legitimate chance to win. I think because of that situation, you might be able to talk him into it. If you can't, you can't. But I think it's worth a try, right, Jim? I mean, you just can't wave your hands and say it's not going to happen. But if you were to have that conversation with him, would he be open to at least adding a few teams on a list to at least have that conversation? Because I think that's the only piece that they could move that's really going to move the needle.
Right.
The Miller's an untouchable. Obviously, if you want to have the conversation about Lafreniere, I guess you could. Adam Fox isn't going anywhere. So obviously Igor Shesterkin's not going anywhere. But who's a guy that can actually get a return? That seems to me the guy that can do it. But you're right. You're going to have to convince him the waive is no movement clause.
Right. And listen, then you got to figure a lot of teams are up against a cap, even with the cap going up this year. So the Rangers would probably have to take salary back, even if it's not equal to his 11 plus million. But you could be spreading that over, a couple pieces that you get back in your lineup that could fill other holes that they have while also creating opportunity. So I'm going with your theory here of this is going to shake things up. It's going to make us less of this East-West team. Like you said, if the plan is he's not coming back after this year anyway, like it checks a lot of boxes. Again, for me, getting him on board with it or making him so uncomfortable that he's like, yeah, get me out. Okay. That's the toughest part, I think, because in theory, and listen, we're not GMs, we're not coaches, we're not executives, we're not owners. So a lot of what we do is in theory, right? But in theory, I like that because I think you could really fill quite a few holes, in your lineup here. So going down that road, biggest holes, whether Panarin's here or not. Obviously, if you take him out of the mix, you're creating a big hole as far as point production.
Sure.
But whether he's in the mix or not, what do you view as their biggest holes to fill going into this offseason?
Well, the one thing is that just trying to find a right wing to play on the top line, right? I mean, they tried so many different people, and it just never being able to find. Going back to Kakko, moving guys around, like just being able to find a wing for that top line just seems to me like one of the biggest holes that they need. And it's so odd because he was able to supply that Trouba, but they never really replaced that physical presence, the game-changing hits that Trouba would have. They never were able to find that. Keandre Miller can be really frustrating because he certainly has the size to be that kind of a guy. But, Trouba was special. I can't tell you how many games he would just turn things around with a big hit. Some of them, borderline, but, it just became kind of fun to watch him turn games around with his hits. I think that's been missing too. Those are the two thing. I mean, you look at the center position with Miller, and if Zibanejad is staying, Trocheck. But honestly, I think they've done a pretty decent job with that. But the right wing to me just seems to be where that's been their Achilles. And hopefully Fox is back next year for a point guy on the power play, because I think that really hurt the power play. He was not 100%. I mean, whether it was that shoulder injury he suffered against Washington last year or whatever, it just felt like he was just not the same. But I think if he comes back and healthy, I think that can make the power play better. A full year with JT Miller, but the physical presence and the right wing are the two things that leap to mind for me. How about you?
Yeah. So for me, it depends on how they line up. So if Mika becomes a wing on JT Miller's line full time, like if that's what Mike Sullivan goes with, then Vincent Trocheck is a second line center. Okay, he's one of your top two centers, him and JT. Now you open up, I think, a big hole that I don't think you can fill internally right now on your third line. And I think they need to figure out the third line. There's a lot they need to figure out. But the lack of identity in building their third line to me really stands out. And maybe it's because I'm so hyper-focused on the Florida Panthers and that third line, even with moving parts, Tarasenko leaves, but eventually you add Brad Marchand to the mix. There's an identity there. You can trust that line offensively to produce. It's a shutdown defensive line. And they have that DNA. They've got that Bennett, Kachuk, Barkov DNA all throughout that third line. They're just pit bulls. So that's why I did a column right before we went on air here, right about how I thought Vincent Trocheck, if they keep Zibanejad in the middle, is a nice fit as that third line center.
Yes.
Shave off a couple minutes per game. He was playing 21, 22 minutes a night, these last couple of years. And I know the production was great. The chemistry was great. Even last year when things went sideways for the Rangers, your most productive line, five on five, was Trocheck, Panarin, and Lafreniere, the 60 games that they were together.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So, but I think in the big picture, if Zibanejad stays at center, I don't think he's equipped to be your third line center, but I think you can build an identity third line centered around Vincent Trocheck in the middle. So I'm curious. I throw it right. You volleyed to me. Now I'm volleying it back to you. What do you think of that proposal?
I like that because like I said to you before, I'm not really sure that Trocheck is a second line center. I think he's better suited to be a third line center. As good as he is, the leadership. I think when you're going to put together a championship team, a perfect team, Vincent Trocheck is your third line center. If he's your first or second line center, I think that's a little too much. So yeah, that works out perfect because then you can. Because then, how would you look at are you looking at I guess if Kreider stays, could you see like a Kreider, Trocheck, like Cooley? Like is that something that you'd like to do?
So in the article, I put that was one of the options.
Right.
If Kreider's still here, Kreider, Trocheck, Othman.
That's
Cooley, Trocheck, Othman, Kreider, Trocheck. I'm trying to remember who I didn't list yet. Cooley.
Perot?
So Perot and Othman flanking him. Now that gives a totally different dynamic.
Oh yeah.
Trocheck and Othman would be, heavy on the forecheck, but then it's kind of like Panarin. You got to let Perot do his thing. He's a little bit different fit there. So I'm wondering if Perot is more of, he's got to be a top six guy. Not that you just hand it to him, but if he earned it in camp, or he goes develop his game at Hartford, we'll see where he's at. But yeah, I put that in as a possibility too. I mean, listen, Trocheck, great mentor for two young players. That would alter that identity that I'd like to see on that third line, but I wouldn't rule that out either. But I think the linchpin to it would be to have Trocheck on the third line, assuming Zibanejad's a center and not a wing.
Right. And then it goes back to my point about looking for wingers. Like, will Zibanejad work there? Is he going to snap out of it? Something seems to be up, right? I mean, we know how dominant he can be. That's what's so frustrating. I don't know, you like dealing with Ranger fans, like they've had it with Zibanejad and Kreider, and I have to like shake them and go, these are great players. I mean, I know you're frustrated with them, but I don't know about Zibanejad, but there's a possibility that 20 can be in the rafters. I mean, it's crazy to think, but he's the third leading scorer in the history of the franchise goals wise. He's tied for the most power play goals in franchise history, but both have been very maddening. Last year was a really difficult year for both of them. Kreider kind of saved himself last year by what he did against Carolina in Game 6. But yeah, it's frustrating. But these are two guys that look like they might still end up being here. So how do you make it work? Right. And having Zibanejad as a wing, having Kreider on the third line, to me, that works. And we saw it. We saw it during the year. But what frustrated me about Peter Laviolette, I wonder how you felt, that like he would demote these guys, and yet down a goal, you pull the goaltender, they're out there. Like, like it wouldn't affect their power play time. It's like, well, wait a minute, you're demoting them, I guess, in theory, 5-on-5, but then when you need a goal, it always seemed like he felt obligated to put those guys out there.
Right.
So you're really not banishing them because you're still putting them out there in the most important time of the game. And that frustrated me about Peter, but I get it because there's always the possibility that something big can happen with those guys, and it just never did last year.
So it's funny that you use that as the example, because what did the Rangers never do last season? Goalie pulled. When did they ever? Literally, never scored. Ever. 6-on-5, never scored.
They gave him up, but they didn't score.
Right. They did give him up. That is true. But right, like as you said, there was this unwavering faith in, okay, but Shesterkin's off. Kreider's only played 12 minutes tonight because we don't have much faith in him, but he's over the boards. Mika's over the boards. yeah, you're spot on. But that's what made me laugh about it, is that they never came through, that group,
No.
Yeah, those guys were the poster children. Molly Walker and I were talking about this. They were the poster children of what didn't go right last season. And part of it was, Mika's body language, and he was just so sour and down. And this malaise that overtook the team really emanated from him. And then I think, and you realize so much how powerful one or two players can be in a locker room. So either Mopey Mika's got to disappear for good, meaning he's got to get rid of that and get back to being Mika Zibanejad and buy in whatever Mike Sullivan is selling, buy in on it, because people will follow his lead, because they certainly followed his lead the opposite way last year when he was, I'm not trying not to be disrespectful, but it just
you're
painting
right.
the picture of being, Mopey Mika.
And the thing is that we've seen how many different coaches. It's always easy to let the coach go. Laviolette was different because he only had a year left on his contract. You weren't going to extend him, and you weren't going to have him go in as a lame duck. Clearly, he was given a 3-year contract because that was the window they felt it was to win, and they weren't going to win, so you let Peter go. But you're not making any serious roster changes, and yet you keep changing coaches. Kind of makes players feel like, all right, well, they'll just bring in another coach. Well, maybe it's time we start, shaking up the roster. You look what the Knicks did. Everybody wants Thibodeau gone, but you know what? They made the big trade, right? They realized they weren't good enough, so they made the cat trade. The Rangers haven't really done that. I guess if you want to say JT Miller was like a needle mover, but you still have that core of guys that just have not changed over the last few years. You've had success, but is the success real? Yeah. You had a 2-0 series lead against Tampa, but you followed that up by blowing a 2-0 series lead against the New Jersey, and then you go to the conference final again, only to miss the playoffs. And it's the same running theme where I think they're more like last year and the Devils series than they are the teams that went to the conference final. They don't go to the conference final in 22 if Crosby doesn't get hurt. They're down 3-1.
Right. Oh, yeah,
they lose their best player. They come back, they win. They've got Carolina's number, Jim. They could beat Carolina in their sleep, and then they end up losing to Tampa. So the next year they take on a Devil team. The power play is unconscious the first 2 games of that series. Power play disappears, they lose the series. And then the same thing last year with how the power play helped. So it's time to really look at whether this is good enough. And clearly it's not. So how do you get to the point? Mike Sullivan's that in between. He's a championship coach, but his contract suggests that the championship's not going to happen anytime soon. So this coach isn't going anywhere. So what are we going to do with this roster to get it to where it needs to go?
So the thing is, and I really believe Chris Drury doesn't tip his hand. He doesn't want to talk to us that much. He does his 3 sessions with the media a year and everything. But I will say, I think it's clear that he recognized after that Panther series, and maybe it was even before that, but certainly after the Panther series, I got to do something here. And if somehow he had been able to move Jacob Trouba before July 1 last year. Now Trouba, as was his right, kind of blocked what Drury was trying to do. Drury was trying to do something. And listen, I'm no Chris Drury apologist here, but he got rid of Barclay Goodrow to free up money because they had no money. They had no money to spend. But if he had been able to get rid of or move Jacob Trouba, they would have had some money to play with. That doesn't mean that they would have gotten Jake Gensel or, name your top free agent, but they might have been able to get more of those type players that I think he clearly identified later on with the JT Miller trade. I think he saw this, and I don't think he gets enough credit for that because the focus is on, and not that it shouldn't be, but the focus is on how heavy-handed, he was in dealing with Trouba and in dealing with Goodrow and how that rocked the dressing room and what have you. He mishandled how he handled the situation, using the same word almost twice. But I think he recognized and doesn't get credit enough for the fact that he recognized back then, wait a minute, this isn't working. and I need to do something about it. They just didn't have the cap space. The Trouba thing didn't work out at the time. So what do? You hardly have any money. All right, you add Riley Smith and you run it back, basically is what happened.
Right.
Do you agree with that? Do you think he was onto something already last year and I think he doesn't get credit for that. But he does deserve the discredit or the lack of credit or the credit for, obviously blowing up that locker room as it blew up.
But I put that on the players too. At what point do you get over it, Jim? I understand that Trouba is your captain. Trouba didn't want to waive his no trade clause, but clearly he felt that something was missing and had to be changed. Is he supposed to just cave and say, okay, this guy doesn't want to go, so I'm just going to let it be? Or do I try to move him? Same thing with Barclay Goodrow. All right, I can't get it done. It sounds like he shipped him off to Siberia. And could he have let him know? Could that have been handled better? Sure. But at the same time, all right, it shouldn't cripple the locker room. Like it's on the players. At some point, you got to get over it. I understand these are popular players, but you got to get over it. I followed and covered the Devils for a long time. I don't think anybody in that room, loved Lou Lamoriello and the way he handled things, didn't promote the players, and was pinching every penny. So what they did is they took it out on the ice and beat up their opponents and won games. And then what's funny is when they left the organization, they all loved and adored the guy because then they realized that, hey, he was trying to do what was best for the organization. And that's what Chris is doing. So sometimes you make an omelet, you're going to break a few eggs, but I just couldn't understand how. And Barclay Goodrow was a really good guy. I enjoyed covering him, and I'm sure the players hated to see him go. But to allow that to cripple the room, how fragile are you to allow that to happen? Now, I'm not going to pretend to know all the ins and outs, but knowing Chris Drury from the Little League World Series to his time with the Avalanche to even his time with the Rangers, the guy wants to win. He's hungry to win. And give him credit. He was not handed this job, Jim, like a lot of general managers are. He worked as the assistant general manager. He worked his tail off to get this job. I saw him working under Jim Schoenfeld. I saw the work that he did before he was given that gig. So he wants to succeed here. He wasn't handed anything in his life in this organization. So, yeah, he might have handled it a little bit better, but I got to put some of that on the players to just get over it and play well and get through it, man, because unfortunately that's the business of hockey. As you said, Chris Drury had Jacob Trouba had the right. He negotiated the contract to have that no movement clause. He didn't do anything wrong, but at the same time, Chris Drury's not doing anything wrong with trying to better his team. He didn't give Trouba that contract, so I think that's the disconnect that I think the players have. The lack of communication they talked about at the end of the season. How much communication is between a general manager and a player?
Yeah.
A coach and a player, I get. So doesn't it make you feel like some of these players really felt like their standing in the organization might have been greater than it actually is? That players are disposable. As great as you are, this is kind of the way of the world, that you don't always end up having your career with one team or get to stay where you want to stay. So I'm not being anti-player. I'm just saying that at the end of the day, to have it ruin your season, that's on you. Chris Drury's trying to help the team. He could have handled it better, but so could the players.
All right. Well said. You and I are totally on the same page with that. Real quickly, you mentioned Keandre Miller before. You said, you might be able to get something back for him. Obviously, if you trade him, it creates a hole. So real quickly, where do you stand? Like, here's the line, right? And I know it's never black or white. There's a lot of gray. But here's a line. Keandre Miller, are you investing in him long-term? Do you believe that he's got to be a long-term piece of the future of the Rangers, part of their core? Or do you cut the cord now and say, we've seen what we've seen. We don't like the direction it's headed. He's going to be a good player, but he's not going to be what we envisioned, especially at the money that it's going to probably take to keep him.
But like you said, it creates a hole. I don't know how you replace him. And the things I'm hearing is that I don't know how well coached he was here. Housley wasn't given the opportunity to return or even interview to return.
Yeah.
So is it possible that he just needs to be better coached? I mean, he's got size, he's got a shot. I think there's something there. So again, playing general manager, I'd hold on to him. I think that properly coached, given the opportunity. Hey, he can be frustrating. I get it. But at the same time, I think that there's something there you can crack the code on him. I think you can. Similar to with Lafreniere, same thing. I think there's something there. Kakko, I wasn't sure about. I thought I was on board with moving on, but I just have a feeling that holding on to K'Andre Miller is probably going to bear fruit.
Yep.
I can't substantiate it, but I feel that.
Yeah, well, and that's what it is. I mean, because you can argue it, right? You can argue it either way. Like you see how good he can be. You see how big and strong, great skater, 40-odd point player a couple years ago. You see what he can be. And then you see the mind-numbing turnovers and giveaways. And it seems every time that he had an egregious moment, it was in the back of his net. Now, some of that's bad luck, too. Guys make turnovers. Igor makes a great save. People forget that, Will Borgen or whoever made that turnover. It seemed like every time, especially last year, that K'Andre Miller made a bad play, made a bad decision, turned it over. It seemed like it was in the back of the net, right? And some of that's bad timing. Some of that's just bad hockey. So, yeah, I could argue it either way with the keeping him, trading him, but you got to replace him. And that's the first thing that you touched on, too. And ditto with Lafreniere. I know there's a lot of talk, a lot of scuttlebutt, should they trade him? I think I wouldn't say he's an untouchable, but I would say that I'm pretty confident that Lafreniere is going to be in this lineup opening night next season.
And I think he deserves to be. And I think that there's something there. And I have a theory. I don't know if you buy into it with Lafreniere and K'Andre Miller. These guys that came up during the pandemic. And I think we need to give them a little bit of a break of just how, and even Kakko to a certain extent, although he was already up with the club, how much were they harmed by losing out on training camps? That Lafreniere, he was drafted in 2000. Like, how much did you lose working with your coaches, training, the whole coming up in playing in the bubble or playing that 56 game schedule with nobody in the building? I just wonder how much did it stunt these young kids and mess them up early in their careers, that they were not given like a legitimate NHL start to their careers, because they're both maddening, and all three of them, Kakko too. Like I said, Kakko was up, but missing that camp, missing games, everything got messed up. I'm not trying to make excuses, but I just think that there's a common thread with some of these players that's got to be a very difficult way to start your career. And did that maybe stunt their growth and kind of mess things up a little bit, to where now the right coach needs to kind of correct some of that? Just a theory, but I think both of them can be maddening, but both of them kind of came up in what was a very, very strange period in the world, and they were really robbed, I think, of a genuine start to their careers.
It's definitely an interesting theory. Obviously, you got to take it outside the Rangers and look at, the other teams, 31 teams as well, when their kids that came up through that time,
look at that whole
bigger scope.
Look at Lafreniere's draft. Really? I mean, Stützle didn't become Stützle for a couple of years. Listen, Byfield's been hurt, but it's kind of same. So look at that draft. Again, I haven't done the work around the National Hockey League, but just off the top of my head, thinking about that draft, which is always looked upon as a bad draft. Yeah. But now you're starting to see, as the years go by, there's some players that are starting to find themselves in that draft. So I do think there's something to that.
All right. I'm going to delve into it. You got too many other things to do. I'll delve into it.
Tell me how that experiment comes out. All right?
Yeah, I may be dangling from a curtain in my house after doing all the research, but yeah, I think it's an intriguing thing to look at, not just the numbers, but to talk to these guys and get their feelings and talk to people that are closer to the situation from the individual organizations and everything. So, all right, see, you show up. And I've got more work to do. Basically, what it comes down to.
It's interesting talking to the player. Like, the player doesn't know. They don't know. That's the way it is. like going through calling games during that period of time, just how odd it was. Like, it was just, I remember, obviously I don't want to get too, in the weeds about it, but you remember that awful situation that happened to Keandre when he was doing that chat session.
Yep.
It was just it's not the way you want to start something that is so difficult, like playing in the National Hockey League. It's you want to be given the best chance, right? And I'm not sure a lot of these kids got that opportunity.
All right. So we could go on all day, which you don't have time to do.
Sorry.
with the Rangers. Just real quickly, quick look, Stanley Cup Final. We get the rematch. I thought Matthew Tkachuk nailed it the other day. He said, hey, he just like shrugged his shoulders. He's like, two best teams in the league. Of course, we're going to meet in the final. We expected to play Edmonton in the final, which I thought was pretty cool, pretty telling. And, I'll admit, I kind of thought maybe the Dallas Stars would be the team that would be there, but okay. So I think the rematch, I think it's cool. We don't get a lot of them, in the Stanley Cup Final historically. Mm-hmm. I'm really, really, like last year, I really believe Florida was winning the Stanley Cup. Like there was no doubt in my mind, one way or the other, they were going to win. I am really on the fence this year. And a big part of that is, man, the best players in the game, the world-class players, at some point they have their moment, right? And Connor just missed last year, even though he played out of his mind throughout the playoffs last year. I'm on the fence. This Edmonton team's got a little magic going to it with their, Stuart Skinner all of a sudden is, again, playing at an elite level. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins might be playing the best hockey of his career right now. Connor's Connor and hasn't even fully exploded offensively yet. No. So anyway, I'm building this whole thing up to say, yeah, I'm on the fence still. Like, I think I lean towards Florida to repeat, but boy, can I make the case for Edmonton. So what does Donnie Pucks think? What's your Cup Final prediction here?
I think it's Edmonton's time. I do. Now, I've been looking at Florida, and I've been picking against them the whole playoffs thinking, well, eventually this run's got to come to an end, right?
Yeah.
And, I wasn't surprised they took care of Tampa, but, they were on the ropes against Toronto. All right, Toronto's Toronto. But, you're down 3-1 in the third game. You're about to go down 3-0, and you win in overtime. And, and then obviously Carolina looked like they just weren't ready for the task. If I were to ask you who are the two best teams going into the conference final, you would say Florida and Dallas. And Edmonton wiped the floor with Dallas. If not for just a brain fart third period where they committed all those penalties, they sweep Dallas.
Yep.
They overcame that bad game 1 loss in the third period. And Dallas is a really good team. Like, so Edmonton, listen, they beat LA. They fell behind, but they came back. They always beat LA. But Vegas is no joke. They won the Pacific Division. Wiped the floor with them. Wiped the floor with Dallas. This Edmonton team is so impressive. Skinner's found himself. I thought he was an Achilles heel, but clearly he's found himself. He was big, I thought, at times in that game 5, especially late in the second period when Dallas was really tilting the ice. But they're getting production from guys other than McDavid and Draisaitl. Corey Perry's found himself. What a great story that is, right? Nugent-Hopkins has been good. Kane's been good. You see Skinner scores a goal out of nowhere, and they are getting production. Their blue line, we saw Bouchard last year, what he was able to do. Nurse is really good. Ekholm's now healthy. They've got injuries, right? Connor Brown's banged up, and then they obviously lost
Zach Hyman
for the playoffs. So they come in a little banged up, and we've seen the history, right? Teams that lose in the Stanley Cup, they go back, and the rematch usually goes to the team that lost the year before. I'm going to say Edmonton in 6.
Wow, 6. Yeah, I'm still on the fence. I still got a couple minutes to make a prediction here. I'm really not sure. Last year, man, I had no doubt in my mind. Even when it got to Game 7, I'm like, Florida's going to find a way. They're just going to find a way, and they did. I'll tell you the one aspect of this that I love, and man, Rangers, all teams should be, but Rangers really should be taking note of this. If you can build a lineup where you trust all 4 lines, and all 4 lines can contribute a little offensively, but contribute to that, building that DNA like both teams now have. It's not just Florida. Edmonton has that too.
Mm-hmm.
Man, Rangers can learn a lot by watching these two teams, how they're constructed, the buy-in up and down the lineups, even how the ice time is doled out. You look at Florida, 19 different guys have scored a goal in the playoffs, in these playoffs. That's insane. But that's guys, everybody getting an opportunity and making the most of it, right? That fourth line, they get their minutes. AJ Greer, my gosh, who had ever heard of AJ Greer before the Stanley Cup? Who, by the way, talking about injuries, looks like he's out at least for game one, maybe the first two games as well. But boy, the Rangers could learn a lot about lineup construction looking at these two teams.
It was an honor. I got a chance to call the first 4 games of that series last year, and Paul Maurice had no problem putting out whatever line. He had no issues whatsoever, and it made them fresh. And and then you get other teams who are like, well, we got to bring out the same 2 lines because we need a goal or whatever. That they didn't. There was such a matchup problem because they didn't care. They had trust in everybody, and there were so many big goals being scored by just everybody. Lundell was big for them, like guys that you wouldn't expect. You're preparing. All right, listen for Hagee scoring a ton of goals. All right, we got Tkachuk, we've got Bennett. Like but there's so many other guys that contribute as well. I thought maybe because I thought Carolina's blue line was a little better than Florida's going into the playoffs last year, but I was proven wrong by that. I mean, their blue line's amazing too. Like they zero weakness, and Bobrovsky's a Hall of Famer. Even though he's bounced around different teams and all that, like he's become a world-class goaltender. And that's the one rub, is that I still think he's way better than Skinner. But Skinner's playing out of his mind. And we've seen Cup champions not have great goaltenders. Darcy Kemper's won a Stanley Cup, right?
Yeah. Aiden Hill.
It's crazy. Yeah, Hill. You go back to Nikolai Abubulin. You can go back to the goaltenders that Chicago had, whether Crawford, Niemi. Like they just seem to find better than average goaltenders. You just need your goaltender to play great. But if you got studs in front, you can get by with a lot less than a Hall of Famer.
Right. Which goes back to the whole theory about science. Is Igor worth this? Okay. We won't even go down that road. That's a whole other conversation.
We can do a week of podcasts on this team. I'm telling you, because that's fascinating too.
Right.
They weren't in a position to let him go. But when you take a look at the goaltenders outside of Vasilevsky and I guess Bobrovsky, the goaltenders that got paid don't necessarily win. And like, who the hell is that ends up winning a Stanley Cup? So
right.
But it's probably a good thing because of now in the transition, they can be competitive because they got a world-class goaltender. So they can go into this year thinking, hey, maybe we can still make the playoffs.
Right. And I think too, with the salary cap, with what, with the big leaps this year, next year, moving forward, the big leaps in the salary cap, I think, kind of takes the rub off, we're paying Igor how much, I think at the end of the day, whether it's your goalie, whether it's your centerman, it's your top defenseman, your best player deserves what he can get. Yeah. And there is no question in my mind that Igor is their best player. As great as Panarin is, Mika's had his, moments every. Igor is their best player. So you pay him, you keep him. There was nobody there. You weren't going to roll the dice and hope that, Jonathan Quick and 1B, whoever 1B
Louis
was.
Domingue,
Yeah, right, exactly. We're going to find their inner Stuart Skinner, So yeah, it's almost a moot point to even go down that road, but it's fun nonetheless.
Yes.
That said, I know you got to run. You got a lot of work ahead. When I listen to you today, I'm going to hear this sore throat, and Hans going to be like, "Look, Greca, what you've been doing? You've been out all night." No, I was talking to Cerny for an hour, which Alan Hahn will say, "What a waste of time." But
no, he won't. I will tell him you said hello, though.
Yes, I definitely do say hello. Right. So thanks for your time, buddy. I really appreciate it.
You got it.